Hello and good morning to all. Thank you for joining us from across the region. Now we all know as 2021 gathers momentum, the world continues to be besieged by not only a pandemic, but a raging infodemic with trust in all information sources at record lows. Now on top of this, we have an interesting observation, which probably isn't really news to any of you attending today's panel, is that less than a quarter of the people we see, hear, or read about in the news are women. According to the latest research available, only 19% of cited expert sources and 23% of top editors across major global news outlets are women. And in fact, when we look at APAC compared to other regional markets, the disparity could go up as high as up to 47%. In light of this phenomenon, and to really mark the International Women's Day this year, Edelman APAC has convened today's panel to really focus on this important topic on where are the female voices and why we need more female representation in the media. I'm Leah Teo from Edelman Shanghai and have the pleasure of moderating today's panel, in which we hope to shed light on these regional variances that we're seeing and to explore potential partnership role for businesses that are serious about gender parity to address this issue. And we're very honored to have with us today 4 panelists to share their views. We have a female journalist, a female head of a large nonprofit organization that supports media, a female company spokesperson, and a lone male, sorry to describe you like that, Rob, a leader of a very large company in this region. And they will come together to discuss at a time, when trust at all news sources are at record lows. How can more female voices within and those featured by the media help restore trust in the fourth estate? I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Jeanne, Bourgault, CEO and President, Internews US. Joining us from US tonight, Jeanne. We have Robert Candelino, CEO, Unilever Thailand and Inland ASEAN. Hi, Robert.
Hello, thanks for having me.
We have Nobuko Kobayashi, Strategy Execution Leader of EY APAC, Japan.
Happy to be here, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Stephanie Phang, Managing Editor, Southeast Asia of Bloomberg, Singapore.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Right. Today, we will spend about 45 minutes on the panel, and audiences, you are free to submit questions relating to our topic today at any one time through the QA function you see on the screen below. And if you've got a question for any panelists in mind, please feel free to let us know as well. Okay, then, now let's jump in with our first question. My first question goes to Jeanne. We know Internews has been promoting equality for all by taking a more proactive stance to increasing women's participation, inclusion, and leadership in media and technology. As the CEO of a large nonprofit organization that supports media in more than 100 countries, what do you believe are the challenges that women face in getting their stories and perspectives heard and covered by the media?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, calling in from the East Coast of the United States tonight. So very happy to be joining everyone here. And I just want to start by saying across society, across the industry, the biggest problem is a complete lack of awareness that there is a problem. And it's really hard to fix things if it's not seen as broken. But at Internews, we've found sort of 3 big reasons for the gap in female representation in the media. The first is a lack of diversity in the workplace and leadership positions in the industry itself. This is a male-dominated industry. Media is a male-dominated industry. There are real glass ceilings. There is lower pay for women. There are problems with sexual harassment, and often there are few opportunities for advancement within the industry and sort of low participation of women in leadership position. So that's the first big problem with representation. The second one is that women are severely underrepresented as sources of expertise in the news. They not only don't work in the industry, they're also not represented in the news, as you quoted. In the last big survey that looked at these, the Global Media Monitoring Project in 2015, showed that men represent 76% of the people we see, hear, and read about in the news, and 81% of those expert sources, just as you were saying. This gender gap is biggest when it comes to politics. Women are only featured in 16% of political news. And we are looking forward to these results being updated in 2020. This research is done every 5 years, but as far as we know, there's been modest improvement, but it hasn't improved by much. And when it comes to this representation as sources of expertise, we see both demand side challenges and supply side challenges. On the demand side, the women themselves who could be featured as experts, on the demand side by the journalism, the media outlets, there's sort of a lack of awareness, as I said, that this is even a problem. There's unconscious bias against featuring women. There are often tight deadlines, so journalists often rely on their old Rolodexes. They've always gone back to the same sources they go back to. And of course, industries themselves generally have a lack of women in leadership positions that can serve as spokespeople, as those expert witnesses. So that's on the demand side. On the supply side, the women themselves, there are often social norms that make it really difficult for them to present themselves and speak freely as an expert source. There are often, as many of us know, practical issues where we're the ones taking care of childcare and household responsibilities. And so sometimes it's difficult to fit in an interview at 9 o'clock at night on the East, when you just put your children to bed. Women can be less willing to provide interviews for a whole bunch of reasons, including sort of the fear of backlash and harassment. And of course, as I said, women privilege men in positions of power and leadership as their external representation. The third big issue that we see is that gender issues receive very little coverage in the news, that sort of women's stories are significantly underrepresented in the news compared to men at a ratio of approximately 1 to 5. Just one story that sort of targets women to 5 stories that target men. And this is actually a big business opportunity at some level. We know that women tend to be less interested in the news. 54% of women say that they're interested or very interested in the news. 64% of men say that. So this is like a real business case and a real opportunity for media companies to grow their audiences if they increase their focus on women. So those are the 3 big issues that we see facing this challenge around the world.
Thank you, Jeanne. And of course, it's a lot of different, sides of the factors that contribute to all this that we're looking at. But do you think, compared to the rest of the world, what about Asia? Do you see numbers? Is it a big difference?
I mean, Asia is it's really similar to the numbers. The overall numbers are very consistent around the world. In that same report that we cite everywhere, that every 5 years, a survey of what's happening in media, it showed in 2015, the last report that we have published, only 1 in 10 experts in Asian news are women, compared to the global average of 19%. So it is lower. We are hoping in 2020, when the 2020 results are finalized, we will see an improvement there. And we have at Internews in-house done our own look at this, really specifically at the participation of women in environmental and climate-related news. We have a program that we call the Earth Journalism Network that has about over 10,000 journalists worldwide who are covering environmental issues. And we did a survey across several of the Asian countries that we work in that really looked at 126 stories on environmental coverage. And one of the main findings was that the voices, most people thought that women's voices were represented, but we found when we looked at the content itself that women were significantly less represented than men as sources of the stories. Only a quarter of all 126 stories had literally no women sources at all.
Right. So I think the ratio that you mentioned, 1:5, it's across global, and hopefully we get to hear more data from yours, the report due this year. And well, I'm just going to bring it to Stephanie, who's coming from the editorial vantage point of view. Do you think we're seeing similar reasons to why this is happening?
Oh, definitely. I think Jeanne summed it out very, very clearly in terms of the factors that contribute, both on the supply and the demand side, which, I think the problem is really unconscious bias, which Jeanne highlighted, because if we look around us and the world that you and I, all of us grew up in, right? The world is not that skewed in terms of women that we see in business and leading, or well, in business definitely. But I do think there is something to be said about the lack of representation, and I think because Jeanne has done such a good job summing up what are the issues on the demand side. I'll talk a little bit about the issues on the supply side.
Yeah.
So, the lack of representation in corporate and government leadership roles, right? I mean, these are the people that journalists like to quote, or we need to quote, right? Because these are the decision makers. And I was struck just looking over the last few months of news coverage, right? We had, for example, sometime in September, Jane Fraser becoming the first woman to run a US banking giant, right? And it was remarkable. She was the first woman to run this. At the time of her appointment, there were just 31 women who were leading S&P 500 companies, right? Just listen to some of these headlines that's come across our desks. In January, South Africa's only female bank CEO, Basani Maluleka, resigns. In December, Biden picks first woman to serve as Deputy Defense Secretary. In October, Oil CEOs Club gains a rare new member, a woman, right? So there's really, I think, as a world, as a society, we have an issue with in terms of having women represented in positions of leadership, and that's been something of a challenge, right? But I think work is being done, and I do think that the more everyone pushes to address the problem, including boosting the demand on the media side, this will help.
Right. The other point that we also saw, not just from the supply and the demand side of things, when we dive a little bit deeper, including, looking at our own data from the Edelman Trust Barometer 2021 trust findings, we saw that there was a 22-point increase in women engaging with news content. And it seems like, we definitely need to come together and address the need where women wants to hear a little bit more from women, So what is Bloomberg? Can you share with us, is Bloomberg Business doing anything to address this balance?
Yeah, we're working very hard to address this. So we started Bloomberg, we started this in Asia in about 2016, right? And it was a really grassroots newsroom effort. We basically decided we needed to tackle this issue of, the reporters not really looking at women as sources. So we created sort of a source list for reporters, right? And we said, if you're having trouble figuring out who to talk to, look at this resource list of women who have who are willing to be interviewed, who have been interviewed, talk to them. We started tracking how we were doing this. We looked at how many times we were quoting women in stories. We also started an all-female lineup for our TV programming in Asia Pacific, and that became a global effort. So it was all-female lineup. This was for International Women's Day, right? Every year we mark International Women's Day this way in a very public way, but without really announcing it, we just did it. We just went and booked female guests for International Women's Day. And what was remarkable about it was the first year we did this, and we didn't announce that we were going to do this, we got feedback from people. They said, wow, you guys had all women on today. That's amazing. And what's amazing to me is that's remarked upon, that to have an all-female lineup of TV guests is remarkable. I mean, no one finds it remarkable when you have an all-male guest lineup, right? Like, it's normal. So that is just not reality. So we've tried to do that. And then when this New Voices project became a global project, we also started to address the supply side of the issue, which I've talked about. As Jeanne mentioned, there are very senior women executives who are reluctant to come on TV or to talk to media. And so Bloomberg LP basically decided we would provide media training for women executives, and this is rolled out globally. And the reason we did this, was to address the supply issue, but also to it helps the newsroom realize, right, that there are women out there. So the key, I think, to this New Voices project that we've been doing for a number of years now is we realized we needed to work harder on framing the argument for journalists as to why this is so important for our coverage. Yes, the representation of women leaders in these coverage areas is low, but that's only part of the problem. Journalists have a responsibility to better reflect the views and perspectives of women in their coverage. And so this is something that we've been driving very hard at. I'm happy to say that the New Voices media training part of the program, has been rolled out to global cities, including New York, San Francisco, Toronto, but in Asia, we've done Mumbai, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Sydney as well. This year, we'll be expanding to include Johannesburg. And our aim is really to amplify the voices and increase the visibility of underrepresented executives, right, across financial media. One other thing we've done, which I feel is very important, is we have this rule. We get invited to moderate panels quite often. Our journalists get invited, and we are not allowed. The rule is no Bloomberg journalist is allowed to moderate a panel unless it's a diverse panel. If it's an all-male panel, we're barred from moderating that. And I think that sends a very strong message. And I'm glad to see we have a diverse panel today.
Yeah,
Same here.
definitely. Yeah, if I may comment on the media training, because that's a really great point, and that you brought up, representing the kind of the supply side of these women spokespeople. I think women particularly could benefit from such a training, because if you look around and see the senior businesswomen who have been extremely successful, it's often the case that they really almost held their heads low and worked very hard with the company against a lot of headwinds. And they have not been so trained to speak up or self-promote as much as her male peers are. It's just that the reality. So I think it's an extra effort that's with highlighting to train women on the media speaking and then also external promotion of herself.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing that, because it is not just a strong initiative that you created in APAC and brought it global, but you also looked at how you prepare, even though there's the options out there, right? So we're so glad that you're doing this. And we talk about having a diverse panel discussion. I'm so pleased because I want to hear the next perspective from our only male leader on the panel, Robert. We know overall, I think we're seeing a lot more work done from the corporate perspective, and we know there's more benefits if there's a more diverse senior team or not, because we're looking at more effective risk management, we're looking at innovative corporate culture. I mean, in fact, internally at Edelman, we reached 50-50 gender parity amongst our senior leaders, and we want to be able to do more. And we know Unilever has done that as well, so huge congratulations. And which brings us to, can you please share a little bit more with us on how organizations like Unilever is empowering its female leaders to not just share their expert views publicly, but including, through the media. And one key point, if you could tie it back, what do you think is the perceived return value of doing all this?
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's lovely to be here, Leah. Thank you for having me. I feel honored, frankly, and privileged to be the only man on a very distinguished panel for this very important event. I think Jeanne actually captured it very, very well. I like the fact that there's an acknowledgement that you can't fix something unless you acknowledge that it's broken in the first place. And I think if you take this either from the moral lens or from a pure economic one, you recognize very quickly that things had to change. And we know factually that diverse boards and diverse teams perform better, be it in sport, be it in the boardrooms. We know that diverse ideas cultivate and encourage better thinking, better interrogation, better and more dependency on fact, which leads to better decision-making in businesses. But equally, there's a moral imperative here for us in general, I think. It doesn't make sense that if the population is 50-50, then why wouldn't we have equal representation in general? And if you look at it from our lens in particular, we're a consumer products company. 2.5 billion times a day, so a third of humanity interacts with a Unilever product every single day around the world. In right or wrong, the vast majority of the people who see the advertising, who buy the product, who are the decision makers in the household, who cook the food, who wash the clothes with the detergents that we make, are still women. And so for us, it didn't make sense that the people making decisions in our offices didn't reflect the reality in the market, nor does it make sense that commercially we aren't recognizing the critical and vital role that women play everywhere in the world in holding society and families together. So several years ago, we wanted to be a gender balanced organization. I would argue we're probably among one of the largest companies in the world who has achieved it at scale, 14,000 managers around the world. We are 50-50. If I take a Thailand slice to that, we have more women managers than men. We have more women directors and above than men. And in fact, we pay women more than men. But that doesn't feel wrong in any way. It doesn't feel unbalanced. It actually feels morally and commercially incredibly right. It's also very important to recognize, just as a society, especially now, given where we are in the world, empowering women in all facets of society, political, economic, journalistic, is the single biggest catalyst to economic expansion available in the world today. McKinsey said it's about 28 trillion, which roughly is about the size of 1.5 US economies. I don't know about you, but I think we could all benefit and rise billions of people into greater levels of prosperity if we had another 1.5 American economies or a whole Chinese economy into the global system. And so for us, it was very obvious. It's consistent with our purpose. We want to make sustainable living commonplace. We have a stated intention at Unilever of being, if not one of the most inclusive companies in the world. And therefore, we wanted to make sure that is reflected in our workforce, which we think we've achieved in general, but there are still pockets where we need to do better on both sides, gender, socioeconomic, race, sexual orientation. We need more diversity in all its facets. And indeed, we think it's right to catalyze better economic activity, which the world can benefit from.
Thank you, Rob. I really like that. It almost sounds like you have already had a very good head start and it's already in the system. It's not a thing, My question is for Stephanie, because, all the news that you come across. So in the newsroom, do you think you can think about any companies who have made similar conscious efforts in the same space?
You're talking about, I think so. I think Unilever is a great example. And I think we also, not just in the newsroom, but as a company, it's a big focus for us. And we have a Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, right? Which we developed to track the performance of companies who are leaders committed to transparency and gender reporting. So only companies that have met a minimum threshold for disclosure and best practices get on this index. I'm happy to say Unilever is on the index.
Congratulations.
So in 2021, this index includes 380 companies across 11 sectors.
Wow.
So quite a lot of companies are taking this seriously, obviously. In Indonesia, we have the first company from Indonesia joining the index this year. It's a company called Mitra Keluarga Karya Sehat it's a healthcare company. So these are some examples. And we have 2 new financial companies joining the index this year in Asia, both from Taiwan, Cathay Financial Holding and Kingstown Bank. So here are, examples of companies that putting an effort into this. I will say, I was looking at the our Unilever ticker. I'm very pleased to say, Rob, that we quoted a number of your female executives in Unilever stories.
Wonderful.
Nice.
And we can definitely supply more. I know the conversation is on supply side. We have an abundance, so please.
Thank you both. Thank you both. I think we're seeing more companies stepping up on their efforts in this space. And obviously, let's hope the numbers go beyond 380, right? And obviously, we know why this makes sense, not just because morally, but also to achieve stronger business results. I want to move our attention to Nobuko-san. Nobuko-san is someone whose opinion has been so regularly picked up by the regional media. So I'm going to ask you a very personal question, because I'm also aware in our audiences, there are a lot of people who are waiting to hear from you. So it's going to be a little bit more personal, if you don't mind. Can you share your experience in how you became such a sought-after spokesperson in this region? Did the media or the companies you have worked for take a while to accept you in this role as such a strong female voice? Did you even have to work a little bit harder than your male counterparts?
Thank you for the question, Leah, and you're very kind. I would say that I started building my sort of media profile through writing opinion pieces first. So the speaking role came later, almost accidentally, which took a life of its own. It was not pushed by the company. I kind of did it my own. And ironically, I would say that being a woman actually helped in my case, as our co-panelist mentioned, the supply side and demand side problems. But I do think that the media tries hard to find women speakers. So senior business women are scarce in Japan, especially. So it worked to my advantage. That's the reality. But I reflect on why I originally started writing, aside from my personal passion to write. Thinking back, right, it was about having a voice in the world. And I think it was also influenced by the fact that I'm a minority. As I went on, I became more and more aware of the gap of the women's voice in the world, be it in the writing or speaking. Therefore, the narrative scarcity as a minority senior businesswoman, particularly in Japan, I think it drove me to write continuously and also to speak. And that did not come easily for me, to be honest, because I'm more of an introverted person by nature, but you can overcome that by exercise and getting used to it. So I am more comfortable today than when I started 5 years ago. But it was a journey of learning. And for me as well, because it opened my eyes to how much of a gap there is in the world. So I became more aware of it as I went to speak more and write more.
I really like that self-driven mentality here, because I mean, someone told me, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. So if we want enough, you want to make things happen. And with that, again, do you think you can give some advice for companies who think about putting forward their female voices, or even for, I'm very sure there are some female spokespeople joining us today?
Sure, definitely. For the employers, I think it's definitely encourage women to speak. That's what Rob is doing. That's what the media training also helps as well. The exercise starts very close at home, so you don't have to jump onto BBC from day one, but encourage them to speak in internal meetings first. When you see a fit, push them to speak in external opportunities. And because these speaking roles are still very much male dominated, I think it's a great differentiation point for the companies such as Unilever or us to have a gender balanced voice and who represent the organizations.
Right.
May I just Leah, may I just jump on that, because I think the point has been made a couple of times here, and I think it's a very important and insightful comment that's being. One of the discussions I happen to have very frequently with senior women in our organization. Particularly, I'm a Western man, I'm Canadian, having lived in Asia now for 4 years. One of the most frequent discussions I have with women is just getting them to believe they can.
Oh.
It is shocking. It's not a capability gap.
Yeah.
It really is not. It is, there is, for whatever reason, the most jarring thing for me is when I look at these supremely talented, highly accomplished, very poised, incredibly smart, talented women. And I say, well, why don't you want my job? And they're going, no, I can't imagine ever doing that job. Like, but this dare to dream or this self-belief, like, why can you not envision that? And I think that is a systemic issue that we need to crack as leaders in whatever field, right?
Yep.
You can't be, and see, but also we need to be an engine to push and help our people understand that it is not only possible, it is kind of, it is kind of expected that, you know, you should ascend and make a bigger impact, and the role you can play as a senior woman to cast a very big shadow on helping accelerate this issue that we're all trying to tackle in gender equality and balance at top tables.
Thank you, Rob. I think it's a very good point. I think I would like us to spend a little bit more time talking about this, because what we're saying is a little encouragement can go a long way. And you know, early on we talk about whys and how we choose to challenge. And perhaps, you know, Jeanne, previously we saw that, you know, you were once quoted that media reflects culture and how media can influence what people consider normal. I think to the point that Rob was talking about earlier, now media being such a powerful tool that can be used for the greater good and to influence the readers, what stereotypes can we smash? What cultural impact can we drive if we all come together to address the disparity here, including the point, you know, that psychologically or mentally they feel that I can't.
And it's so important that we find a way to say we can. I have a quote from an American writer and historian who says, "Who is heard and who is not defines the status quo. By redefining whose voice is valued, we redefine our society and its values." And I really love some of the trends you see around the world. One of my favorite countries in the world is Iceland. The current prime minister is a female. Iceland is famous for being the home of the first female president in Europe and the longest serving female elected head of state in the world, who served, I think, from 1996 to 2020. And the current prime minister, the female prime minister, said that she realized the impact of having a female president on television screens, in newspapers for so many years, when her 6-year-old niece asked, "Can a man become president?" And that's what we want, right? That's what we want. When women's voices, expert and authoritative voice, are accurately reflected in the media, we get rid of some of the harmful gender stereotypes. Everybody benefits. Gender bias reduces in schools and workplaces and communities, and girls and boys grow up in a world where they can participate equally, where they both can be presidents of their countries. And that's where we want to go. But the factors, I think, are really difficult. And I think it's harder than just saying we all can and should do it. There really are constraints. As we said, cultural constraints. There's security constraints. Women get harassed. The online violence against women is so tremendous, and it happens when women rise up a little bit, it becomes a really devastating factor. So there's many, many factors that we all need to work together to fight against to help get these faces and voices in the news and heard around the world.
Right.
I might just add, it's not just a numbers game, right? I talked about the all-female representation. It also matters what you get the women to come and talk about. So as Jeanne says, it's really impactful when you have female leaders, right, being portrayed. And you know, one of the studies, and I can't remember which one, it was about media coverage. It might have been an Internews one, you know, which looked at which voices, what kind of voices were women used for, and overwhelmingly it was, you know, women are quoted as victims of disasters, or, you know, as victims of domestic violence or whatever, right? That's when you see female voices. But, compare that with the number of women who are quoted who are, CEOs or who are leaders and all that, that's the kind of image that has been portrayed in the past, right? Women are victims and the leaders are men. Now, obviously, with people like Christine Lagarde and Janet Yellen, increasingly in the news every day now, that's, hopefully that's changing, that perception. But I might also add that both Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde went from one really high-profile job to another really high-profile job, which again addresses the issue of scarcity. That like there are very, very few high-profile women in positions of leadership.
Thank you, Steph. Now, just moving along, when we talk about the media space, we also see that advertisers, where often our ads would end up in the media, they also play such a very important role in promoting diversity in all forms. And we all know traditionally advertisements have sort of reinforced these gender stereotypes that we've been talking about. So which brings us back, because I know Unilever has famously laid down this challenge to marketing agencies to become more inclusive when portraying consumers in advertising campaigns or not. So Rob, what do you think has prompted the company to also, lead this? How has it been perceived, either by the agencies or by consumers or internally? Can you tell or share the outcomes or learnings that can be applied to, media where we see the ads as well?
Yeah, it's very similar. There's a moral and an economic. There's an obvious moral
back to that, yeah.
And obviously a huge economic benefit to do this if, as I said before, the majority of the people consuming that media are women, and the people making the purchase decisions in most households are women. And therefore, it only makes sense, therefore, on both of those dimensions to accurately depict women or proper, reasonable and diverse, realistic situations in all of our advertising. We are very fortunate. We believe that business should be a force for good, and we're very fortunate that our scale allows us to amplify our impact. And so together with, I think, a couple of dozen of the largest advertisers in the world, Unilever is a top 2, top 3 advertiser in the world. Together with the top 20 or so, we formed what was called the Stereotype Alliance, which was the consortium, including many of our direct competitors, where we agreed that by 2020, we would unstereotype all of our advertising and just tackle every one of the conscious and unconscious biases that were depicted in every advertisement we did in every part of the world, in every category. And the progress has been astonishingly good. But if I can just give you an example of how, I think, I had the great privilege of leading the Dove brand in America, and I think that's a well-storied and studied example of Unilever.
Absolutely.
But there's and Edelman, our team at Edelman is obviously deeply involved in partnering with us for decades. But there's another, less celebrated example out of Thailand, which is not as dramatic. It was subtle, but just as effective. We have a brand in Sunlight called a brand in Thailand called Sunlight. It's a dish detergent. Now, if you just close your eyes very quickly and imagine every dish advertisement you've ever had, it is likely that there's a woman hunched over a sink, lots of bubbles, tough stains, and she's scrubbing, and then she's somewhat of a hero, or the product is hero in getting to the end result. Yeah. We said, well, actually, that's not necessarily reality. What if we flip it on its head? What if we take the woman and make her a business leader, a small business owner at her kitchen table after dinner is done, and she's busy working at her laptop, running her business. Her 2 daughters are with her husband, who's at the sink with those bubbles, washing the dishes. Simple, but not unusual, not atypical situation in many households. I do dishes,
Yep.
The consumer response was astonishingly positive. Our brand power and preference scores skyrocketed. Our market shares were significantly elevated. We had a very, very good year on the Sunlight brand, due in large part to this slight tweak, but rightful tweak in our advertising. I think that advertising as a very powerful form of media, along with journalism and everything else, has a significant role to play. We believe that, and we're actually very proud of the role we're playing in instituting that across all of our ads everywhere in the world. And we hope that we won't see any more stereotypical depictions from any advertiser, because we just don't think it's good business.
Thank you, Rob. It's amazing, if you think about it, how having this purpose-led angle in terms of how the brand communicates at all levels, whether it's working with your agencies or external partners or internal comms, how much it can move the needle just bit by bit. I'm going to talk about, when we're looking at the overall numbers and data in terms of this disparity in the overall media representation, we saw that, unfortunately, it's a bit sad. The numbers haven't really changed since 2000. So that's a good 2 decades that we're talking about here. And on some levels of, looking at the numbers, we were also not surprised to realize that while media start to talk or write a little bit more about diversity, whether it's in the subject or in the story form itself, they may not embrace it themselves. So sitting as the managing editor across Southeast Asia, Stephanie, do you think it just give us, 1 or 2 quick reasons you think why we haven't really seen much progress in the past 20 years? And if this scrutiny is happening in our region?
Okay, that's a tough one. I think the reason the reason little progress has been seen is because it's not easy, right? It's not easy to fight unconscious biases. It takes real sustained effort, and it also takes leadership from the top, right? And if you don't have those 2 elements, it's very easy to default back into, what people are used to. In terms of the changing shape of the newsroom, I think, I can only really speak for Bloomberg News, but I do think that both the representation in our news and our representation in the newsroom have gone, they've gone hand in hand, really. I will say there is scrutiny globally in our newsroom, and managers are held accountable to make sure they're building diverse teams, and also pipelining in terms of different genders, and also pipelining. We have an intense focus on nurturing local talent too, especially in a region like Asia and Southeast Asia. When I joined Bloomberg 19 years ago, I was already quite impressed because Bloomberg had a Malaysian bureau chief in Kuala Lumpur, which was the job that I interviewed for. The head of Asia at the time was a woman, and she interviewed me. So that was really quite impressive for me. And there were a number of local bureau chiefs in the region. But obviously, if you looked at the newsroom overall, globally, the most senior managers were obviously still overwhelmingly male. But we've made great progress since then. Our 2 current heads for Asia Pacific in the newsroom, the most senior members of the newsroom in APAC are both women. And we've built a strong pipeline in the mid-level managers in the newsroom, where we've achieved gender parity in APAC, which is great. And I do think lots of media organizations are making this focus and a priority. It is an industry-wide challenge. The BBC has their 50-50 initiative, which has been very successful, which is great. And I think organizations across the world are looking to address this. And this does make an impact on representation because, I talked about our New Voices program. Since we started, our representation of external female guests on Bloomberg Television has almost tripled globally. It was very low. It was about 10%. Our goal is to surpass 30% this year, which is still not parity, obviously, but it takes a lot of effort to do that. And our database of female experts has climbed to over 6,000 from 500 since 2018, and we're continuing to build that.
Could I jump on that? I just want to say, Bloomberg is the role model for us around the world, because both your newsrooms are staffed by women and you've insisted on the experts that you have, parodying experts. Because I have said the Gates Foundation, I believe it's the Gates Foundation, recently conducted a study called The Missing Perspective of Women in the News. And they looked at the US, the UK, Nigeria, South Africa, and India. And they found even when newsrooms had gender parity or near gender parity, it still didn't mean that you got expert authoritative women's voices in the news, like even when you had it staffed by women. And so you can't assume just that step does enough. I think what Bloomberg has done is what it is sort of the double whammy that you need. You need to fill your newsroom with women, get parity in the newsroom, and you need to insist that you get those authoritative voices on the news and find ways of counting it to make it work. So kudos seriously to Bloomberg, but it takes more than just staffing your newsrooms. And I think that you've done both.
Thank you both. I would like to focus on this area where we are seeing a little bit of the data in terms of the traditional media trust, which has gone a deep of 8 points globally. And Nobuko-san, recently in this recent opinion piece with regards to Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Organizing Committee issue, which I think we're all aware of, you mentioned specifically about checking the percentage box is not enough. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, can you share then what is enough if we were to increase the ratio here? And do you think, in accordance to what we saw in the Edelman Trust Barometer 2021, in terms of the traditional media, seeing the largest drop in trust, do you think what can help restore trust if we were to really build towards more female representation?
Sure. On the kind of the ratio front, right? The ratio is important, but my point is that it needs to be across the organization. So not just at the top, which is most visible to the world, but you have to have, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, to have a robust pipeline. So bake in gender diversity at all levels so that it's sustainable. We've seen that the women CEO, by her own, everything else being equal, doesn't really move the needle. But if you have the 30% or more women in the leadership group as a whole collectively, then that pushes up the performance of a company by something like a 15%. So it's a collective action, and in the pipeline throughout the organization, normalization of the gender diversity is what's important. Secondly, I think gender diversity, and then actually diversity in a more wider spectrum, is important, not just in the optic sense, but it needs to be respected in the ways we work. What do I mean by that? For instance, that you mentioned the Olympics misstep of a comment, but instead that highlighted this norm of a decision making in a meeting or outside meetings, right? So if a diversity is to be respected in everyday life of a corporate life, then instead of making predisposed decision with a homogeneous, very cliquey group of incumbent holders of the power, we must encourage an open debate under a truly inclusive culture. So ratio is important, but make sure that it's not just the optics, but it's baked into the way we work.
Exactly, and I think it's the same train of thoughts that has come across all the panelists, during their responses earlier on. The follow-up question that I would also like Nobuko-san to share a little bit, do you think there's any form of external partnership models that can be put into place, and it's not just to really pursue targets, but how we move around that? What do you think this should look like?
Sure, external partnerships such as the 30% club or so in the business world that comes to mind is great to raise the overall awareness and keep each other honest. That said, I believe that each organization has to develop their customized roadmap to gender equity, as their starting points are very different from another. So how they develop top down and bottom up the target that progressively improves over time, I think it needs to be very tailor made. So not just one lofty ambition in the distant future that's uniformly applied. You have to have your own, and then also it's important to hold executives accountable to meeting these targets year over year.
Thank you, Nobuko-san. Okay, thank you, panelists, so far for all your thoughts, and it's been, really an authentic dialogue that we're talking about here. And just so you know, our audiences have been really pumped up in the past 49 minutes. The questions are coming in nonstop, but well, in mindful of the time here, I think we'll keep it to 2 questions. I hope you're ready for them, panelists. Okay, got the first question. So to Jeanne or Stephanie, okay? Often news coverage on female leaders include on how they balance family and life. However, men are not asked the same question. So what can the media do?
I do think that there should be like your checklist of what you're allowed to ask and not allowed, just the same as like what type of experts you have or don't have. I do find that even when you have such amazing leaders in the news, it's always shocking to me that continues. And I feel like just like the prohibition on going on panels where there's only men, there should be a prohibition on asking about clothing or makeup unless you're going to ask it of everyone you're talking to. So I think we have to set up rules. It's shocking. I think it's unconscious bias. I think it's all sorts of things, but we have to set up rules and break that habit. It's a terrible one.
Steph, would you like to add any other?
I agree. And, yes, setting up rules, it's always helpful, I think, for reporters, but it's also needing to explain, right? So people often who ask those questions don't realize why. It's, because the unconscious bias is at work there. So I think there's also a lot of work to be done to kind of explain, right? Is your unconscious bias leading you to ask certain questions of certain people? And it's something that definitely we do address in the newsroom. And we do get, we have discussions when we see stories that do that, yeah.
Thank you, Steph and Jeanne. I'm going to quickly jump to the next question so the audiences get to hear a little bit more from our panelists. The other question is, should better representation for women be enforced more legally, like how environmental laws are being enforced? Is there anyone who would like to take this? Should better representation for women be enforced more legally, like how environmental laws are being enforced? Rob, you have anything to share?
Look, I don't know. I don't have a point of view on that specific question, but what I would say is I hope it doesn't have to come to that, right? I would hope that we can mobilize enough action that we don't have to wait the 257 years that the World Economic Forum is telling us it's going to take to reach to gender parity. I'm an optimist. I don't believe that's true. I believe that with leading voices and the mobilization that we have now in society in general, in business, I don't believe it'll come to that. And that's really good. Again, I think we need to paint the picture of why it makes good sense. I think we have to not just talk about the problem, because that very, very often doesn't catalyze the action. But I think you say, it's carrot and stick, and the carrot in this instance is, it is proven, it is fact in business and society, a more diverse, representative depiction in every aspect of life is better for everybody involved and concerned. So I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope we can mobilize ourselves and self-police a little bit and get this done a lot faster and quicker.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
I agree, Rob. And there's an imperative for a business to consider this diversity is not like cost. And then it's a little bit analogous to the environmental sustainability effort as well. It should not be a cost, but it should be the business imperative. Why is that? Well, there's a moral reason that you pointed out earlier, half the population is women. But in addition, I think there's also a merit and the danger for not having the diversity. Let's talk about the danger first. There's a real danger to not having a women's voice for the data gap that we have, and it can lead to a decision making or the policy making, if we're talking in the world of politics, that is very dangerous if we don't consider women's data, right? So media has a huge role to play to represent women's view. And in addition, in business, particularly, innovation is often a product from diversity of opinions, as you pointed out earlier. Therefore, working with the diverse and respecting the diversity of opinions works to our advantage to advance our our business case, and then also to differentiate from the peers. So if we acknowledge all this, I hope that it doesn't come to a legal penalty not having a diversity, but it should be more self-motivated, and we keep each other honest in business and as well as in politics.
Thank you, Nobuko-san. Early on, when Rob was commenting on how, his employees or team would come to him and ask, do you think I can even do it? So that really struck a chord. And we have got this question from the audience. Then how do we overcome the female reluctance that was, talked about earlier on? Jeanne, you have any point on that?
I mean, I think it's really important to invest in training. In all honesty, give women an opportunity to practice. I mean, that alone helps all of us. And it certainly, I've benefited from it in my career. So creating mentorship programs within companies so that women are expected, expectations and mentorship to help you sort of your voice rise and get that training, because it really helps build confidence. And I think it takes that side of the equation to really help.
Thank you, Jeanne. Thank you, Jeanne. Right. Well, it's been such an amazing hour of real discussion and so much inspiration here. And now, before we click the button and go away on a happy Friday, we just want to ask all of you to leave us with, what is that one thing we can all do to advance gender parity through media? Shall we start with Rob?
Okay. The one thing
Yeah.
Look, I think I think it's my answer to that would be similar to the answer to the previous question that you asked. I think there is a systemic issue. I think it's deeply rooted. Getting women to believe they can is in whatever sense, the media or otherwise, is the enormous unlock in my view. And as a consequence, what I will do, and I would encourage everyone else in any position of influence, whatever your ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, gender, wherever you are, wherever you come from, have a conversation with somebody who you think is awesome and tell them that you believe they can. And you would be astonished at the powerful impact and the supportive impact that will have on people.
Oh, I like that a lot. What about Jeanne?
We talked a lot about the moral reasons to do this work. I think for all of us, and I think particularly for businesses who care about this issue, making the business case, publicizing the business case, don't make it about morals, make it about the bottom line, and improve and demonstrate that your companies perform better when women are fully engaged, and media will perform better when women are represented. And sort of making that business case, I think, will be one of the strongest levers to get over the finish line.
Thank you, Jeanne. Steph?
I think the key thing is, well, first, get the top leadership engaged, right? I think that's really crucial. But also, the fact that we're still talking about this in 2021, right, shows us that it's a long fight, right? We have big moments like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all these moments come and they go, but we have to keep the forward momentum going. And that means every one of us can do a part, no matter how small. We need to stay on mission and stick to it and talk to senior leaders in our companies.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's a very good point. Nobuko-san.
Sure. I would like to just point out the very persistent notion of role division by gender. And that is so deeply embedded in our psyche. It's not just in media, but we see in corporate as well. But in media, I'm especially close to the Japanese media, but we often see a pair of a man and a woman, and that's good, there is an equality in the number of gender representation. But then again, the women is always a kind of oftentimes a subordinate supporting role to the man leading. Why does it have to be? It can be a 50-50 role division. And in corporate world, often the women are there, but working as a supportive role, admin, clerical role, which is very crucial, but also a dangerous position for women because these jobs can disappear very quickly under automation. So we have to really think about the consequence of that. So catch ourselves before assuming kind of a gender role and question ourselves. I think that is a the way to fight against the unconscious bias.
Thank you, Nobuko-san. I have personally, learned so much from our very diverse panel speakers today. If I could just leave everyone with one more point that I picked up is that any effort, no matter how small the step is towards driving diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we call DEI, right? They can all help to come together to transform not just our company, but our society. So we can and we must do better. So once again, thank you everyone online for joining us today as we take a stand on this journey together to advance diversity in the communities that we operate in. Have a good day ahead and goodbye. Thank you all.